pyramids off the coast of Cuba and 2,000 feet of water. So who built those structures? How did they get there?
Something is sitting 2,000 feet beneath the waters off the coast of Cuba, and scientists still can't explain how it got there. Massive stone pyramids, perfect geometric roads, structures so deep underwater that according to everything we know about human history, they should be impossible. But in 2001, sonar scans revealed an entire underwater complex hidden in the darkness of the Caribbean. A discovery so shocking, it immediately triggered global attention. Explorers compared it to Atlantis. Researchers called it one of the greatest underwater mysteries ever found. And when divers finally descended into the abyss, what they filmed only made the mystery worse. Before we expose why this site vanished from public discussion for over 25 years, hit like and subscribe. Because some discoveries were never meant to be questioned. The ruins were broadcast around the world in 2003. Then suddenly, silence. No major expeditions. No international investigation. No massive scientific follow-up. The coordinates were known. The technology existed. Yet almost nobody went back. Why? Some believe the depth made exploration too dangerous. Others think the formations were natural rock. But former investigators hinted at something far stranger. Patterns and structures that didn't look natural at all. And if those pyramids were ever above water, it could mean human civilization is far older than history admits. The deeper researchers looked, the more terrifying the implications became. And that may be the real reason the world stopped talking about Cuba's underwater pyramids. A survey that found too much. It was May. The contract was simple. A small Canadian-Cuban exploration company called Advanced Digital Communications had been hired by the Cuban government to do something extremely boring. Look for sunken ships, Spanish galleons that had gone down in the Caribbean during the colonial era, vessels rumored to have been carrying gold and silver bound for the Spanish treasury, when storms, warfare, or simple bad weather sent them straight to the bottom. Cuba's territorial waters had never been properly mapped, and after centuries of colonial shipping, no one really knew how many wrecks were sitting silently down there in the dark. Put something like that underwater, have the water wash over the top of it, and clear away all the debris, and you've got very fine, step-like structures. The job was to go find them. Zalitsky was the lead surveyor. She had immigrated to Canada after the collapse of the Soviet Union and founded the company with her partner, Paul Weinsweg, a Canadian businessman in deep ocean technology. Their vessel was equipped with side-scan sonar, military grade, adapted for commercial use, capable of producing detailed images of seafloor topography at depths that would crush an unprotected human body. Oil corporations and telecommunications firms paid serious money for this kind of mapping. Cuba had paid for it. Here is what makes this strange. For months, the survey did exactly what it was supposed to do. The team mapped sections of the continental shelf. They documented several promising shipwreck sites. They built a detailed picture of the underwater terrain around the island. Nothing unusual, nothing controversial. Then they reached the stretch of ocean, off the Guanahatabibas Peninsula, the westernmost point of Cuba, a remote finger of land that juts toward Mexico's Yucatan, with almost no commercial vessel traffic and no reason for anyone to have ever looked closely at the seafloor below it. The sonar pinged. The data came back, and what came back was unlike anything else in the data set. At approximately 600 to 750 meters below the surface, between 2,000 and 2,500 feet, the equipment registered a series of geometric anomalies on what should have been an unremarkable flat plateau. The shapes were regular. They were arranged in patterns. The images showed pyramidal structures, rectangular forms, circular features, and linear elements that resembled roads connecting the larger shapes. The area was substantial. Estimates ranged from hundreds of meters to several kilometers across. From above, it did not look like geology. It looked like the aerial layout of a city. Watch what Zelitsky does next. She does not call a press conference. She does not pick up the phone. She runs the sonar again and again and again. She compares the images against catalogues of every known geological formation. She consults colleagues. Volcanic activity creates pillars and terraces. Sediment flows produce linear features. Coral growth can build forms that, from certain angles, resemble architecture. She is looking for any of those things in her own readings. She is not finding them. The angles are too consistent. The symmetry is too clean. The structures are positioned in relation to each other as if someone at some point decided where each one should go. The morning after the discovery, she finally says something out loud. She describes what she is seeing as a perfectly geometric architectural design. Coming from her, that is not a flourish. That is a verdict. And the moment she says it, the next question is already forming in the room. The question that will eventually drive every decision that follows, including the silence. Who built it? 9 months of global attention. The story broke in late 2001 and detonated. National Geographic covered it. Reuters distributed the story worldwide. The Washington Post ran it prominently. The discovery moved through news programs, early documentary specials, and across the rapidly expanding landscape of internet forums and alternative history websites. The idea of a submerged city off the coast of Cuba captured the public imagination in a way that almost no archaeological story ever had. Are these just rocks or the remains of an ancient city? Parts of this are just beginning to be revealed for the first time. Here is the part most people forget. The Cuban government did not bury the story. They embraced it. The Ministry of Science, Technology, and Environment assigned researchers to consult on the project. They brought in Manuel Iturralde Vinon, a senior geologist at Cuba's Natural History Museum, one of the most respected earth scientists on the island, to review the findings. Iturralde Vinon is the second person in this story you need to picture clearly. He is not the kind of scientist who chases headlines. He is the kind who measures his words before he uses them. The kind who has spent decades quietly correcting amateurs who got too excited about rock formations. When he was handed the Cuba sonar data, he did the thing a careful scientist does. He refused to dismiss it. He refused to endorse it. He acknowledged that the images showed unusual formations that warranted further investigation. He noted that the geology of Western Cuba was complex, that the region sat near a tectonic boundary where multiple plates interacted, and that unusual subsidence events were at least theoretically possible. And then he said the only thing a careful scientist could say. He called for more data. The silence begins. A return expedition was organized for the summer of 2002. This was the moment that mattered. Sonar can be ambiguous. Sonar can be misinterpreted. Direct visual confirmation would settle the question one way or the other. There is a huge amount of unrecorded human history beneath the ocean's surface that we don't know very much about at all. The follow-up team deployed a remotely operated vehicle, an ROV, capable of diving to the extreme depths where the anomalies had been detected. Cameras, lighting rigs. The vehicle would descend to the plateau and capture direct visual imagery of whatever was down there. The ROV reached the site. It descended. The footage came back, and what the public saw What was shown in the 2003 National Geographic documentary, what circulated in the handful of clips that have surfaced since, was murky, dark water imagery of large stone-like forms. Visibility was poor. Lighting was limited. The shapes were massive, but indistinct. Zalitsky and Weinsweg, reviewing the camera's footage, said the imagery confirmed everything. Pyramidal structures, fitted blocks, evidence of artificial construction. Skeptics countered that the same imagery could just as easily show natural formations, volcanic rock, eroded limestone, or collapsed cave systems. The footage was real, but it was not clear enough to win the argument. What the project needed next was the expedition that would settle it. Better cameras, more dive time, multiple angles, and possibly the recovery of physical samples that could be analyzed for tool marks. Plans were discussed, partnerships were floated, optimism was expressed. That expedition was never launched. And what happened in the months between the 2003 documentary airing and the moment the story disappeared has never been fully explained by anyone who was there. The moment the cameras went dark, Zalitsky and Weinsweg kept giving interviews through 2003 and into 2004, confident, articulate, and already talking about the next dive. They named partners. They named institutions. They named timelines. Then, one by one, the lights started going out. The interviews thinned. The follow-up emails stopped getting answered. Advanced Digital Communications, the company that had made the discovery, went quiet. This site was submerged about 50,000 years ago, and there is no known culture that could create the kind of structures that are said to be at that site. The website that had once featured information about the Cuba project was eventually taken down. Zalitsky, in particular, became almost impossible to reach. The Cuban government, which had been openly enthusiastic, stopped issuing statements. The Ministry of Science, Technology, and Environment did not announce any follow-up research. Iturralde Vinent, who had been the most prominent Cuban scientist publicly associated with the project, went back to his career and rarely discussed the underwater structures in public again. International archaeological institutions that had expressed initial interest politely declined. The major oceanographic research organizations, Woods Hole, Scripps, the National Oceanographic Agencies of the United States and Europe, never added the Cuba site to their research agendas. Within a few years, the most talked about underwater discovery of the early 21st century had effectively vanished from serious scientific discussion. Not debunked, not explained, just left. This is the part nobody wanted to repeat out loud, because once you start asking why a discovery this big goes quiet, you have to start asking who benefits from the quiet. The problem with the depth here is what the scientific establishment understood by 2003, and what almost nobody outside that establishment fully grasped. The depth itself was the problem, and the depth made the entire discovery dangerous. The structures sit at approximately 600 to 750 meters below the current sea surface. Human beings do not build cities on the bottom of the ocean. They build them where they can live, work, and access fresh water. For the Cuba site to have been built by human hands, it would have had to be constructed on dry land or in shallow coastal water, which means that at some point in the past, that piece of seafloor had to be at sea level or above it. Now, follow the math. The last time global sea levels were significantly lower than today was during the last glacial maximum, the peak of the most recent ice age, approximately 20,000 to 26,000 years ago. Massive ice sheets covered much of North America and Europe, locking up enormous quantities of water and lowering sea levels worldwide by approximately 120 to 130 meters. 130 meters is not 600 meters. It is not even close. Even at the absolute lowest point of the last ice age, the Cuba site would still have been hundreds of meters underwater. To place architecture on that plateau at sea level, you would have to push the date of construction back to a period so ancient that any civilization capable of building a complex of this scale would predate everything currently known about human prehistory. The alternative is tectonic. Western Cuba does sit in a tectonically active zone. The Caribbean plate, the North American plate, and several smaller microplates interact in complex ways. Earthquakes occur. The geology is dynamic, but the scale of subsidence required to drop a landmass from sea level to 600 meters below the surface is extraordinary, requiring either a catastrophic tectonic event or a sustained process of subsidence over thousands of years at rates far exceeding anything documented in the geological record of the Caribbean. Itural de Vinon acknowledged this himself. He noted that while unusual tectonic events were theoretically possible, the geological record of Western Cuba did not show evidence of the catastrophic subsidence that would be required. So, the site is too deep for Ice Age sea level explanations, too deep for documented tectonic processes, too deep for any timeline that fits within established human history. The Cuba discovery presented a problem that could not be solved within existing frameworks. If the structures were artificial, they implied a human history that contradicted everything mainstream archaeology and geology held to be true about the Caribbean. If the structures were natural, they were an unusual but ultimately unremarkable formation, interesting to specialists, but not worth the enormous expense of deep ocean research. Faced with that choice, the scientific community did not pick one. It picked neither. It chose silence, the forbidden word. And that silence had a name no one wanted to attach to it: Bimini. The shadow that has trailed the Cuba discovery from the beginning is the Bimini Road. In 1968, divers off the coast of Bimini in the Bahamas discovered what appeared to be a paved road on the shallow sea floor. Large, roughly rectangular stone blocks arranged in a linear pattern extending for approximately half a mile. The discovery ignited decades of debate. Some researchers argued it was evidence of a lost civilization. Others argued it was natural beach rock that had cracked into rectangular shapes through ordinary erosion. The argument has never been definitively resolved. Mainstream geology treats Bimini as natural. Alternative researchers continue to argue otherwise. The Cuba site sits in the same waters, the same broad geological context, the same zone of Caribbean mystery. When the discovery was announced in 2001, the comparisons to Bimini were immediate. Some researchers suggested the two might be connected remnants of the same lost civilization, submerged at different depths by the same catastrophic events. Others saw the comparison as damning. Bimini had been controversial for decades without resolution. Adding another ambiguous underwater formation to the pile would only fuel fringe theories without producing scientific progress. And then there was the word Atlantis. Plato's account, the earliest written source for the legend, placed the lost civilization in the Atlantic Ocean beyond the Pillars of Hercules. A deluge story because we developed as a species within this period of rising sea level. That, to me, is so fundamental to understanding ourselves as a species that we should be looking into this. The Caribbean fits the broad parameters of Plato's description better than many other proposed locations. When the Cuba discovery hit the news, Atlantis speculation exploded. Books were written, documentaries were proposed. Alternative history websites and forums seized on the story. In the public imagination, the Cuba underwater city became a potential confirmation of the most famous lost civilization legend in human history. That association may have been the final blow to serious scientific interest. Mainstream archaeology has spent decades distancing itself from Atlantis speculation. The legend has been used to justify countless pseudo-archaeological claims, from ancient astronaut theories to deeply problematic narratives about advanced civilizations supposedly predating indigenous peoples. Serious researchers avoid Atlantis associations as a matter of professional survival. When the Cuba discovery became entangled with the legend, the scientific establishment had a powerful additional reason to step back. Supporting research at the site would mean associating oneself with fringe theories. It would mean risking professional credibility, which is how a confirmed sonar image, a follow-up expedition, and a National Geographic documentary all ended up under the same lid, and how that lid stayed shut while the people who knew the most decided whether they were ever going to lift it. What the quiet researchers have found here is what makes this strange. The Cuba site has not actually been abandoned. It has just been abandoned by everyone with funding. The handful of researchers who have continued to investigate the site over the past 2 decades have done so quietly. No institutional support, no press releases, no grant money to speak of. They face the same wall the original project faced. The depth makes exploration extraordinarily expensive. The location in Cuban territorial waters adds political complications for researchers from countries with strained relationships with Cuba. The scientific establishment's lack of interest means funding is nearly impossible to secure through ordinary academic channels. What these researchers have pieced together is quietly troubling. The original sonar images, reanalyzed with modern software, continue to show geometric regularity that is difficult to explain through any natural process. The angles are too consistent. The arrangements are too organized. The overall pattern reads less like random geology and more like deliberate design. The 2002 ROV footage, examined frame by frame in the years since, shows details that were never emphasized in the original documentary coverage. Some independent analysts claim to see carved surfaces, fitted blocks, and architectural features that would be impossible to produce through natural erosion or volcanic activity. These claims are not peer-reviewed. They are not published in mainstream journals. They circulate through smaller publications, conference talks, and online communities. None of it constitutes proof, and every year the data sits a little colder, a little dustier, a little further from anyone with the resources to do anything about it, including from the woman who saw it first. The people who stopped talking. Of all the silences in this story, Paulina Zalitsky's is the loudest. Think about who she was in 2001. Articulate, confident, a trained Soviet engineer with a discovery on her hands that made every front page in the world. These places were in difficult access areas, such as the ocean bottom close to Cuba and the jungles of the Gulf of Mexico. Now think about who she has been since 2004. She has not given substantive interviews. She has not published follow-up research. She has not responded to inquiries from independent researchers. The phone calls go unreturned. The emails go unanswered. The website is gone. Weinsweg has occasionally surfaced, giving brief interviews that confirm his continued belief in the original discovery, but offering little new information. He has hinted at political complications, tensions between Cuba and the United States, and difficulties with international research partnerships. He has not provided detailed explanations. The Cuban government's silence is just as striking. In 2001, Cuban officials were openly enthusiastic. They saw potential for international attention, scientific prestige, even tourism revenue. They assigned researchers. They facilitated the follow-up expedition. Then they too went quiet. No official Cuban scientific institution has published research on the site since the early 2000s. No Cuban government agency has announced plans for further exploration. The discovery has been effectively erased from Cuba's official scientific agenda. Some researchers speculate that pressure came from international scientific institutions or political actors whose identities have never been documented. The discovery was too controversial. The implications were too destabilizing. Better to let the project fade than to pursue answers that might overturn established narratives. Others suggest something more concrete, that the follow-up expedition found something all parties agreed should not be publicized, something that confirmed artificial construction but could not be explained within existing frameworks, something that raised questions nobody was prepared to answer in 2003. These are speculations. There is no documentary evidence to support them. The people who know what actually happened on that 2002 expedition, what the cameras saw before the lights went out, what was discussed in the months after, and what was decided in rooms whose attendees have never been identified, those people have chosen not to speak. And the longer they stay quiet, the louder the question gets. Why even the natural answer is a problem. Here is the thing nobody likes to say out loud. The depth of the Cuba structures is not just a scientific problem. It is an existential one, because if the structures are artificial, they imply one of two possibilities, and both of them are catastrophic for established understandings of the past. The first possibility is that human civilization is far older than currently believed. For the Cuba site to have been built at sea level and then submerged through natural sea level rise alone, construction would have had to occur at a time so ancient that it predates every known human civilization by tens of thousands of years. Anatomically, modern humans would have had to develop complex, urban, architectural societies far earlier than any current evidence suggests. And those societies would have had to be subsequently lost, leaving no trace in the conventional archaeological record except for ruins too deep to easily explore. The second possibility is that catastrophic tectonic events can occur on scales not currently recognized by mainstream geology. For the site to have been built at sea level and then dropped to its current depth through subsidence, a landmass would have had to sink hundreds of meters in a geologically brief period. The geological models used to understand earthquake risk and coastal stability would be fundamentally incomplete. The sudden dropping of inhabited regions into the ocean would be possible on scales current science does not anticipate. Neither possibility is comfortable. The first undermines archaeology. The second undermines geology. And both raise the specter of Atlantis, not as a literal place from Greek mythology, but as a category of event. The sudden destruction of a civilization, the burial of its remains beneath the waves, the erasure from history until technology advanced enough to glimpse what was left behind. If it happened once, it could happen again. This may be the deepest reason for the silence. The Cuba discovery is not just an archaeological puzzle. It is a challenge to the stability of the present. If human civilizations can be submerged and lost, if the land itself can drop without warning and carry cities to depths where they will never be recovered, then the coastal cities of the modern world are built on assumptions that may not be as stable as anyone wants to admit. Miami, New York, Tokyo, Shanghai, Mumbai, all of them sit at sea level. All of them assume the land beneath them will remain where it is. All of them depend on geological models that the Cuba discovery, if confirmed, would call into question. The implications are not academic, and the scientific establishment may have recognized in 2001 that some questions are dangerous to even start answering. The structures still waiting in the dark. More than 2 decades later, the strange structures discovered off the coast of Cuba remain one of the ocean's biggest unanswered mysteries. The sonar scans from the deep plateau near the Guanahatabes Peninsula have never been fully explained. But what's even stranger is that they were never truly debunked either. Instead, they were quietly pushed aside and forgotten. What makes this so unsettling is that the technology to investigate the site already exists, and it's far more advanced now than it was in 2001. Modern deep-sea robots could return to the plateau and capture crystal-clear footage of every structure resting on the ocean floor. Scientists could map the entire area in incredible detail. But despite all the advances in technology, almost nobody has gone back. Part of the reason is money. Deep ocean exploration is extremely expensive. Political tensions involving Cuba have also complicated international research for years. But for many people, those explanations don't fully answer the bigger question. Why did interest disappear so suddenly after the discovery made worldwide headlines? And so the structures remain untouched, sitting in complete darkness nearly 600 meters beneath the Caribbean Sea. If they are natural formations, then this may simply be one of the greatest missed scientific opportunities in modern history. But if they were built by human hands, the implications become terrifying. It would mean an advanced civilization existed long before recorded history, in a world that may have been destroyed and lost beneath the sea. The coordinates are still known. The sonar images still exist somewhere in old archives. Footage from the 2002 expedition has never been fully released to the public. Everything needed to return is available, except the willingness to do it. For now, the pyramids wait in silence beneath the Caribbean, exactly where Paulina Zalitsky first found them in 2001, hidden in freezing darkness and crushing pressure, untouched by time. And someday, someone will finally send another vehicle down to that plateau and reveal the truth in full detail. The only question is whether the world is ready to see what's really down there.